Hey, welcome to the Imagine What interview with a pro. This month, something pretty special. We've had a writer in the past. We have a theme park writer, but I wanted to bring in a different type of writer. We're bringing in an author. Her name is Kate Grasso. Grasso. She'll correct me,
Grasso.
I'm sure. Grasso. There we go. I was overthinking it as always. You might know her online as Disney Cicerone. She does some amazing Disney Parks content out there on the social medias. But she's also an author with 4 books, 3 fiction and 1 nonfiction that kind of dives into the Disney parks and history and all that. And she'll talk about that more in just a moment. Um, but I wanted to bring her on because she brings a unique perspective to her writing, where she's taken 2 different passions and kind of combined them in a non-conventional way. She makes fantastic Disney parks history content. She knows her stuff, and then she found a way to combine that with writing fiction books. In the past, we've seen historical fiction books and things like that, but this is a whole different take on it because it's not historical fiction; it's modern day, but it's a way that she's able to trick the readers into learning Disney facts and history along the way. It's edutainment, as Walt Disney would call it.
Yes.
So yeah, we'll have her talk about that just a second. I think the best way how I like to do this is, Kate, would you mind introducing yourself for somebody who's never met you? What's the elevator pitch of who Kate is?
Well, I am a Disney content creator, obviously an author as well. Something I fell into about 4 years ago when the whole world changed, and we're all evaluating who we are and what we want to do. And I decided that I was like, well, I've been studying Disney history for about 18 years, and I was like, maybe I should just make some content about that for fun to share some stories that, people maybe haven't heard before, because I feel like it's always the same Disney facts recycled over and over and over again ad nauseum, and some of them aren't even accurate. So I was like, well, I'll just start making some content. And I did put some things out there. I had a post that went 20 million, which is funny because that's the one that you replied to and was like,
Oh,
actually, here's the inside story, which, so you're also kind of part of my story, which is really funny in that way. And then I just decided, well, this is something I'm going to do. I'm just going to run for it. So I started making Disney content, and now I do it full time. But I also really, really love to write. I think writing is my first passion. And I'm also, I guess, beyond that, I'm also a mom of 3. I have 3 wonderful kids that are getting old too fast. And I have a wonderful husband as well, who's a musician, Irish musician. And so we have a lot of creativity going around in our house. It was funny because I'm launching a new book this week, but my husband's also releasing a new album. And so we're like, look at us go. Like, we have
wow.
all this creativity going on. So anyway, that's just kind of who I am. I do a lot of Disney content, mostly Disney history, but I also love to dig into how Disney impacts us and how emotionally, mentally, psychologically, all those things impact us in our lives and why we love it so much. And that's why I do what I do.
And I think there's something you didn't touch upon for your Disney content. One reason I like it is because it has a positive flow and a positive energy to it. It's the reassurance that classic Disney gives us. When you watch an old film, but it's you go in there and you remind everybody. Walt wasn't perfect, but he was able to do this, and these artists were able to accomplish that, and it kind of reflects down to your viewers, and that's something that I really appreciate about it's. I think it's also the motherly voice. It's very very comforting and reassuring when you watch the videos.
Yeah,
What
that was, sorry, that was just a strange thing that I found out along the way, that apparently my voice is very comforting. So I'll take it.
There you go. Um, so you said you started writing the books about 4 years ago, but did you write it all before that?
I did a lot of creative writing, a lot of personal writing. I did a lot of things that were just kind of my own, that I didn't plan to put out into the world. I've been writing poetry for years, and it's just always been my medium of just like processing through things in my life. I had a wonderful teacher when I was in high school who basically secretly pulled me aside from like a state test creative writing that I did. And she's like, you are a phenomenal writer and you need to do this. And she's like, I'm not even supposed to tell you that I read this thing, but I'm going to tell you because you need to do it. And so it's always been in the back of my mind that like, oh, like I have some sort of gift for this and maybe I should use it for something someday. But finally getting to do that now at this point.
When was the earliest you remember writing? Like how far back into your timeline do you remember writing something?
Well, it's funny because I was just going through some of my old journals, and I was doing this when I was a kid. When I was probably, 8 or 9 years old, I was writing these poems. They're not great poems, but they were a start. Everybody starts somewhere. And I,
Yep.
just started exploring what words could do. What if I strung them together this way? Was it different than how I put them together this way? And so, yeah, really young, I just started playing with words, I guess is how you could put it.
What writers do you look up to? Like, what style or just things that you enjoy reading? Like, who are the ones who sit on your bookshelf?
Um, I have a lot of historical fiction on my bookshelf. I also have a lot of obviously Disney history books, but I always felt like there's some really great Disney history writers out there, but it's always very like fact driven style of
Mhm.
writing, and so I have kind of this like weird blend of like historical fiction. With also these Disney history books. And so they sit side by side on my shelf, which feels like an accurate representation of how I'm blending them for mine. But um, specific authors, I mean, I also really love the classics. I love reading Jane Austen. I love, really digging into some of the classical writing and the ways that they used words back then, which were so different than the ways they do now. So really, I don't know if I have specific authors beyond that, but it's just kind of those are the genres I generally read.
Would you mind walking us through your process? I'm always curious how other writers tackle their mission. So what is the Kate writing process look like?
Yeah, it's different for everyone, right? It's
Oh yeah.
so different. So for me, it's a couple of different things. I usually make sure consistency is key. So I make sure that I'm sitting down at least once, if not multiple times per week. I have one day reserved that's like, this is my writing day. This is the day I'm going to go sit at a cafe for 8 hours and just write. But for me, I go by my intuition of what I feel like writing that particular day, which is why I have like nonfiction and fiction. I actually have been writing two books simultaneously because some days I feel like writing
Hmm.
nonfiction, where I'm just kind of like pulling some thoughts in history that I've been studying, and I'm going to sit down and I'm just kind of ruminate on that and just kind of see what comes out. And some days I'm like, I really got this story in my brain of these characters and what they're going through, and I want to, make them move forward in that story. And so I kind of just let myself have the freedom to write whatever it is I'm feeling that day, if that makes sense. And it's a process because it's like sometimes I have to go back and rewrite something that just didn't go as I planned. Like I go back and write it and I was like, those characters shouldn't be doing that thing. I don't think this is really where I want to go with this. Or I go back and read the nonfiction and I'm just like, this wasn't necessarily my best work, but that's okay because it was a starting point, and I go back and then do some editing. So it really depends on the day, what I feel like writing, and I let myself lean into what I'm feeling at the time.
So you mentioned going to a cafe and writing for 8 hours. So you,
Yeah.
you think getting away from your office or your workspace is helps your creative flow?
Absolutely. Yes. I do most of my video editing work here in the house. And since I work from home and I work for myself, like getting away to that other environment, something, it definitely triggers my creative brain that, hey,
Hmm.
you're in this other location where you have space. You don't have to think about doing the dishes or doing chores or any other distractions. I can just think. And I also have, because I have three kids, my house is very noisy. So
Yeah.
it's good
I,
to
I,
to get out into a place where I can just kind of focus on what I need to focus on.
it's funny because when I was at Disney, like it was always writing in my office with the door shut. I could go outside to the patio area um,
Yeah.
to get away, but productivity would go out the window because everyone and their mother is walking by and wants to have her conversation. And so it was, oh, doors shut. Okay, leave Kevin alone. Let him get some writing done. And let me tell you, it's tricky to write when you're in a cubicle. Getting that office door was the most productive thing I was able to accomplish there.
I bet.
Um, yeah. So how do you get an idea for a new story? Where do those come from?
I spend a lot of time in the Disney parks, as you know. I usually
Yeah.
go once per month to either Disneyland or Disney World because I'm not local to either. And I get a lot of inspiration from being there. It pulls, not only all the creativity from all the Imagineers that have created all these beautiful, amazing things and this environment where we can be completely immersed in a story. And something about that triggers this creativity in my brain where I'm just like, I just get ideas from it. And I also see things that remind me of history stories that I've studied in the past. And so, I mean, sometimes you'll see me, if people see me in the parks, and sometimes they do, I'll be like on my phone, like doing stuff. I'm not texting somebody. I'm usually writing. I like write in my notes
Hmm.
app when I, when I
Oh
have time
wow,
in line, because,
that's a
if you
skill.
have to wait, yeah, if you have to wait 45 minutes in line, that's 45 minutes of time you can be creative and write. It doesn't have to be sitting in a cafe, it can be anywhere. Um, and I'm totally lost the plot about what you asked me now. So,
Oh,
good question.
where do your story ideas come from?
Yeah, yeah. So when I'm in the parks, a lot of the times I'll just get inspired by something specific. Like, for instance, this latest book that I just wrote, which is Who the Mirror Reflects. This was a really interesting one because I was hanging out with my friend Kirk from Walrus Carp and our good friend Dean, he's not a content creator, he's just from across the pond. He's an English guy that we know who's lovely. And we were sitting on the Walt Disney World Railroad, and we hear the Liberty Bell do, like, and the train echo back and forth, shave in a haircut, 2 bits. And Kirk is sitting next to me, and all credit to him, and I credit him in the book. He's just like, wouldn't that be fun to kind of write like a love story about like two people who loved each other, but they couldn't tell each other any other way, but like saying shave and haircut, 2 bits. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a great story. And so sometimes those things just kind of like pop out as we're in the parks. Not all my ideas obviously come from Kirk. That one just happened to, but
Yeah,
yeah,
just
just the
all the great
inspiration.
ideas come from Kirk,
He would
or
like
so
to
he
think
says.
that. Yeah. So anyway, being in that space, I think, is very inspiring.
Yeah, actually, I think it's a good time to mention you do have a podcast with Kirk called Distory, Disney and history combined into one. So yeah, definitely check that out. That you guys do some awesome, fantastic work, and I like
Thank you.
to jump into your comment section and harass you guys every once in a while too, because that's a
Oh,
lot of
you've been
fun.
very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, you guys seem like good people, and I like to help good people. Um, okay, advice for any writers who want to, who might seem hesitant to maybe, put their pen to paper for the first time. Like, what is that push you would give them?
Just start writing. I think so many people get hung up with like, oh, someday I'll write a book, or maybe, or like they worry that they're not good enough, or they don't know how to do it, or they don't know where to start. Just start writing. Just start putting something on the paper. Even if it's not great, you can change it later. That's the beauty of writing. You can change it as many times as you want. But the problem is that so many people who want to write, they just don't get started. And so make a disciplined time when you sit down and you're like, I'm going to write. I don't know what I'm going to write. Maybe it's just a free write that day, something that's never going to get published. But just start writing something. And the more you do it, the more you get comfortable with the words, the more you figure out the order that you want to put them in. And the more that it just kind of, I think, feeds that part of your creative brain where you feel like you can write more. And then you start to be like, oh, actually, this was pretty good. And then you start to get some more confidence. And then you're like, and then you start to really just develop yourself as a writer. So I would say just get started, just start doing it.
Have you ever had a story nut you couldn't crack, like something you just keep going back to? You're like, I have this idea and I know it's going to work, but there's just something about it you can't seem to put your finger on. Any challenges
Yeah,
like that?
yes. I have a story that I know that I want to write next, and I haven't figured out how to do it yet because I can't figure out which angle I want to approach it from. And so I'm just letting myself have it in my brain as I'm moving through life and being like, eventually something's going to click in place where I will know what to do with it. But it's very frustrating because it's like writer's block, right? Like you don't really know where to go with it. And I think you have to sometimes maybe step away and do some other creative things, or
Mhm.
maybe immerse yourself in some new creative atmospheres that you haven't been in. And sometimes that, I think, then triggers ideas for that and help you get over that block.
Yeah, that's actually really great advice. Is if you ever feel hung up with your writing, is go do something else creative. Go paint a picture. Go
Yeah.
go try a new activity. Go cooking. If you like to bake, start baking. Things like that can kind of really just calm you down overall and really free up some headspace for you. So that's fantastic advice. Uh, who do you go to review your ideas for, or do you keep those to yourself, or who's your trusted advisor?
I have a wonderful friend named Sydney Swanson, who is a writer herself. She's a best-selling author, and she is a mentor for me. She's also my editor, but she has written a couple of books that also involve Disney in some ways. But she does kind of like young adults fiction. And my son loves to read her books. A lot of
Mm.
them are set in space and things. But she has taught me an awful lot about how to think critically about your character. And if you're telling a story of these people, how you really get in their head and think through their story, their backstory, who they are, where they came from. Even if you don't communicate all that in your story, having that idea of like developing them fully as a person, I think has been such an immense help as she's kind of mentored me through this process, because she's done it so beautifully well for so long. So she's definitely someone who also challenges me as a writer. And she's like, I think you could do better at this. And I'm like, okay, you're right. And I know she's right, but I'm like, okay. And she really has helped me along to pull me as a writer into a deeper kind of connection with what I'm capable of doing.
That's interesting. So when you're developing your character backstories, how deep do you go? How many pages of a backstory do you give a character before you even start telling the story of your book?
Um, it's pretty extensive. Some of it I don't necessarily write out all the way, but like I
Hmm.
use my time because I don't have a lot of time, especially having three kids. I spend a lot of time in the car. I'll think a lot about my characters. I'll put on music. Music is a huge medium for me
Hmm.
in my creative process of like, just something that sets the tone. And I'll put a song on repeat, and then I'll just think about that character for quite a while. And usually, pages wise, it's probably like 2 or 3 pages per character that I actually put on paper just to remind myself this is their character sketch. This, so I don't, forget what color their eyes are and things like that.
Yeah.
But I also just really in my head live with them as if they're real people, and when you do that, they become very real to you, and that you then can get inside their head and tell the story from their perspective in a very real, convincing, authentic way.
As far as music goes, do you have any recommendations? Maybe like some Irish music that you would recommend people listen to on Apple Music or Spotify?
I do, yes. My wonderful husband, Elliot Grasso, who has played Irish music since he was 16, and he's amazing. When I met him, he'd already played for like the president and the Library of Congress and like all these like crazy things. And he was like Garrison Keeler once, and I was like, "You are crazy, amazing!" But he plays the Irish bagpipes, which is the uilleann pipes, also tin whistle, flute, fiddle, virtually anything. He also released a piano track because he plays piano as well. But yeah, Elliot Grasso, and he has a really beautiful new project that he's just doing that's called That Which Is Heard, and it's the creating music that's all improvised, but it's in an Irish music medium that
Oh
is.
wow.
Yeah, it's all they're using like dice to decide what keys they use, and they're also integrating the shruti box, which they've never done, which is an Indian instrument that has like bellows. Apparently, it's like a drone. I don't know. It's really neat. But anyway, he's creating something that he wants people to really listen closely, in a way to also help us to learn to listen better and listen better to each other, which I think is really like amazing. That in this world, I think it's good that we listen more to each other. So
Have
anyway.
have you based any characters on him or anybody else you know? Like how much inspiration do you take from your friends and family and plugging them into characters, or even like you going back to Disney history?
Yeah.
If you look at like the history of all the Pirates of the Caribbean, sculpted by Blaine Gibson,
Right.
those were people he saw at church or sitting at a diner, and he would draw them out and take it back to the sculpture shop. So how do the people in your real life impact your storytelling and your characters?
I mean, I think I'd be lying if I said they didn't impact it at all, right? I think that the ways that my husband, we've been together almost 20 years now, like the ways that he loves and cares for me, I think turns out into these books of how these characters love each other. I try really carefully to not put any like specific people in my books, because I want them
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be their own characters in their own right, unless they're
and it can get
historical.
weird. Yeah,
Right. It can get weird.
yeah.
But there's definitely instances and situations that have come up. Like there was a girl in high school who did something really, really strange to me. And I included that in my book in a roundabout way. And, like I think that all these people that have been in our lives impact us in certain ways where how could we not have them pour into these worlds that we're building with these people. So I'd say that everybody I've met has influenced me in one way or another. I think even in the second book in the series, some of the things that you've said have turned up in that one as well. And I think that I think I don't have specific people, but sometimes I include specific instances. I just change it a little bit.
That's interesting. There you go. So the books you have out right now, you have one nonfiction, three fiction, and you would say that the fiction ones skew more on the love story romance side, correct? Have you
Yes.
thought about playing with any other genres? If you did, and if you had to jump into a different genre, what would it be?
Well, I think that the next series I'm thinking about doing is a little bit more historical fiction, but still told within, you know, the story of. I really love exploring relationships because I think the beauty of that is like all of these people that develop these Disney parks, they all had relationships, whether it's friendships, whether it's, romantic interests, whatnot. Like there's so many relationships that impacted people that impacted each other, creatively or otherwise, that really did develop the parks as they are. So telling stories within the context of relationship really is just kind of part of my wheelhouse. But I think, I really want to dig a little bit more into historical. This series was set in modern times, but I'd really love to go back and put people in the Disney parks, drop them into the Disney parks way back when, in a specific year, and be like, let's let
Yeah,
that
that'd
come
be pretty
to
cool.
life. I think that's
Yeah,
where I would like to head next. But again, that would be one of those things where I'm like, I'm not really sure how I'm going to do this, but I'm just going to see what I can do.
So
So,
okay, so you do a story. It's going to be set on opening day, and it's still a romance story. The lady comes in, she has a ticket, and the guy's one of the people who put the ladder against a fence to hop over it to sneak in on opening day, and they meet when he helps pull her high heel out of the still wet cement on Main Street.
I mean, the story writes itself,
It
right?
writes itself, and they go on Autopia, and it breaks down. Mr. Toad breaks down, and they find Ken Anderson sleeping in a closet. It's, you know what? It writes itself.
Right.
That's
I mean,
actually a really fun idea. They're like, man,
steal
I'm
my
really
idea.
thirsty. Yeah. I wish there was a drinking fountain around here, but at least there's
Right.
working toilet.
Oh my gosh. I'm actually so excited about that project. I can't even tell you. I'm very excited to do that. And it doesn't exist. That's the thing, is it doesn't exist right now. There's a lots of wonderful writers who write about Disney history, but they don't write fiction about it. So
So, yeah, wow, time has flown. Okay, I told you this is the problem with these interviews: is time gets away. I like to close out with, if you have any last advice for any young writers. We touched upon this earlier, but anything else that maybe you've been stewing on that you want to make sure. I always say that, if I don't speak up, information does no good just sitting in my head. So you might as well let it out. So yeah, the mic is yours if you have anything you'd like to say, and then we can wrap things up.
what I always tell people who are looking to do something creative is I say, do something that is unique and is you and that nobody else is doing, which sounds kind of difficult. But the thing is that there's so much out there that people feel like they need to copy somebody else, like this person's doing this. Oh, I could do that too. And the thing is that you have such a unique voice to share with the world, and nobody else is going to share it but you. So find what makes you unique, the voice inside you that needs to be shared. What is it, that the message that you have to tell the world? Because it is, I always say to everybody at the end of all my live streams and whatnot, I say, you have a purpose and you matter. And it's true. Every single one of us has something unique to share with the world. And so don't feel like you have to copy what somebody else has already done, because that's them. That's their voice. That's what they're doing. And also don't compare yourself to everybody else around you, because their process is different than yours. So my main message is make sure that you find who you are first and then share that creatively with the world in a medium that you love and that makes sense for you.
Beautifully said. All right, so Kate Grasso, Disney Cicerone on all the socials. You can find her books on Amazon, correct?
Yes, Amazon.
All right, Amazon. Okay, that's the place. And the Distery podcast, co-host along with Kirk. Wonderful stuff. Where can you listen to that?
Yeah, Distory with Kate and Kirk is the name of the podcast. You can watch it either on my YouTube on Disney Cicerone if you want to watch the video version. It's also on Spotify, Apple Music, and basically anywhere else you listen to podcasts.
Fantastic. Hey, thank you for joining Interview with a Pro. I hope
Thanks for having
everyone
me.
has learned from Kate and her wisdom. And if you ever have any questions, you can send them over our way to Imagine What, or I'm sure you can find her on the socials and ping her there. Again, thanks for joining us, and just imagine what you can create. Thanks.